The small seaside retreat where I once laid every brick with my own hands and my loneliness after becoming a widow now thunders with strange music and the loud laughter of people I never invited. "There's no room for you here, you parasite!" my daughter-in-law shouted, her voice sharp as a knife slicing through the salty, damp air. I stood still in front of my own house, the key trembling in my hand, misty rain lashing my cheeks, as cold as her stare. Through the doorway, rowdy laughter spilled from the living room, the place where I once threw Alan's first birthday party. On the railing, the wedding dress I sewed by hand is now hung up as a curtain. Strangers sat on the sofa I upholstered, trampling the rug I picked out with my husband before he died. Helen wore the apron I embroidered for her, curled her lip and said, "It's time you learned to sacrifice. Sell off your dreams so the kids can survive." I felt my heart crack, but no tears fell. I simply opened my phone, my hand shaking slightly, cut off every transfer, then turned on the recorder. The wind blew through, the smell of sea salt mixing with the stench of betrayal. She walked off, pleased with herself. I stayed, gathered evidence, and smiled, knowing the game had just begun. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Jeanette Monroe, 70 years old, a widow for almost 20 years. I've lived quietly and diligently my whole life, like a seam along a long bolt of fabric, steady, meticulous, and hardly noticed. I used to be a seamstress at a small shop in Philadelphia, where my hands mended everyone else's tears while no one bothered to stitch up my own heart. After my husband died of a heart attack, I didn't remarry. I poured all my love and strength into raising Alan, my only son. The beach house in Cape May is the result of 3 decades of saving, of nights sewing straight through to dawn. I once believed I'd built a place for family to stay close, for my grandchildren to grow up in the sound of waves and love. But today, seeing that house seized by my own relatives, I realized sometimes the cruelest people aren't strangers, they're the ones you raised with your whole life. That morning, I came back out of weekend habit, driving my old sedan along the familiar curves, hearing waves between the crackle of an old radio. I thought I'd brew coffee, open my half-finished book, and watch the sunset like always. Instead, when I turned down the little road to the house, I saw a lawn strewn with trash, thumping music, and unfamiliar cars clogging the drive. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped out of the car. The smell of beer and cigarette smoke hit my face. The palm trees by the porch were snapped, the wooden chairs out front smashed, and the little statue Richard gave me for my 50th birthday lay split in 2. I hurried to the door, knocked hard, and Helen appeared. She wore the very apron I once embroidered for her, still bearing the words, "Home is where love lives." She looked at me like a stranger, eyes cold, and said with a sneer, "Why are you here?" "Alan said you hardly use this house. My whole family is making use of it, none of your business." I tried to keep calm. "Helen, this is my house. I came like I always do, and you invited strangers here." She cut me off. "What's yours is your son's, and what's your son's is his. Haven't you heard? Don't make a scene. At your age, you should know what sharing means." In that moment, every sound seemed to shatter. I looked around and saw unfamiliar faces, probably her side of the family, eating, laughing, and acting like they owned the place. A middle-aged man poured beer straight onto the rug. 2 kids kicked a ball into my geraniums I'd tended for over 10 years. I took a deep breath and kept my voice soft. "This place, every brick is my labor. No one has the right to," Helen scoffed. "Please, your time is over. This house needs young people to use it." I didn't answer. The key slipped from my hand onto the step with a soft clink that sounded like thunder in my chest. I bent to pick it up, said nothing more. I just turned, got in the car, and quietly drove back toward town. In the car, I turned on the heat and still felt cold. The cold wasn't from the weather, it was the emptiness inside you feel when you realize the person you raised has become a stranger. That night, I stayed at an old seaside motel where the smell of salt clung to the curtains and a neon sign flickered outside the window. I took out my notebook and wrote, line by line, March 14th. 8:15 a.m. House seized. Present, Helen, Verity, 2 children, 3 unidentified adults. I wrote down the plate numbers of every car, snapped photos through the fence, and backed up everything to a drive. When I reached the last line, I paused to look at a small photo of Richard on my phone, his gentle smile, the saw in his hand the day we built our first house. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Richard. I let our home fall into the wrong hands. But I promise I'll take it back, my way." I opened my laptop and logged into my bank. The list of automatic transfer to Allen Monroe entries popped up. I hit cancel on each one, slowly, like a goodbye ritual. Each click was a cut, but my hand stayed steady. If they wanted to strip me of my self-respect, they'd have to face something stronger: memory, discipline, and resolve. When the clock hit 10 p.m., I called the number Richard's old friend once gave me, attorney Ethan Carver, who specializes in elder financial abuse cases. His assistant answered briskly, "We can see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Emergency, correct?" I replied softly, "The most urgent of my life." Before lights out, I checked every photo, emailed myself a copy, and wrote the final line of the day. Tomorrow, I start over. No tears. Only paperwork and evidence. Outside the bod window, the surf kept its steady rhythm, a sound that soothed and warned at the same time. I was no longer a frail mother thrown out of her home. I was Jeanette Monroe, the woman who once built everything from zero. And this time, I'd do it again, not to survive, but to reclaim what's mine. The next morning, I went back to the Cape May house for a simple reason. I need to grab a few personal items. A legitimate pretext, gentle enough they couldn't block me, but firm enough to let me cross the door that had slammed in my face the day before. The morning sea lay blue and calm, as if it hadn't witnessed last night's storm, but inside me, waves still rose, cold and hard. I parked across the street, sat a few minutes, breathed deep, and adjusted the rearview mirror. The reflection showed a 70-year-old woman with a few silver strands and a strangely calm face. No trace of the mother who'd just been thrown out, only Jeanette Monroe, who worked 30 straight years in a factory without missing a shift. People might see me as weak, but I know, the more precious something is, the more it needs to be protected with quiet clarity. The door opened when I pressed the bell a second time. Verity, Helen's sister, appeared in a short sleep set, a cigarette in hand, eyes narrowing when she saw me. "What are you doing back here?" she rasped. "I'm just grabbing a few personal items. I'll be quick," I said, keeping my tone light. Verity looked me up and down, then sighed as if inconvenienced. "Make it fast. Helen's on a call, don't bother her." I stepped inside and barely recognized the place I once called home. The living room looked like it had been hit by a storm. The blue floral sofa I upholstered was stained and singed on the arm. The white curtains I'd hung myself were now gray with dust. Wine glasses, beer cans, and food littered the coffee table. The floor was sticky with gum and grease. I had to step carefully, afraid of broken glass. The air was thick with smoke, cheap perfume, and damp. I caught a glimpse of Helen in the kitchen, hair in a high bun, phone in hand, her shrill voice carrying, "Yeah, the doctor." "Right. Tomorrow morning he'll sign," he agreed. I stopped, my heart hitching, but I pretended not to hear and kept walking up the stairs. On the wall, the 40th anniversary photo of Richard and me was gone. Only the nail hole remained. I entered the bedroom, once the most sacred place of my life. Now it looked like a flophouse. Blankets thrown aside, an open suitcase, someone's clothes strewn across the floor. The bed frame I'd built of oak for Richard was now where two strangers slept. I turned to the wardrobe, walnut wood Richard made for me years ago. One corner was ajar. The secret compartment only I knew how to open had been pried. I sank to my knees, heart pounding, forcing my breath to slow. Inside, the deed papers were tossed among old bills. The property file I always guarded was crumpled and smudged with fingerprints. The velvet jewelry box of my mother's heirlooms was empty, the rose gold wedding band, the pearl necklace, all gone. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, not to cry, but to memorize, like taking pictures in my head. When I opened them, I took out my phone and photographed every corner, every paper, every sign of disturbance. Then, I saw it, a thick stack of unfamiliar documents shoved under old newspapers. White paper, black borders, a faint red seal. I pulled it out and read the first line: petition to transfer property due to incapacity. Right below was my name, Jeanette Monroe. I kept reading, my hands going cold. The draft stated that due to my severe cognitive decline, management of the Cape May property would be transferred to Alan Monroe, the legal heir. Attached was a medical certification signed by a Dr. L. Patterson declaring patient Jeanette Monroe shows signs of dementia and is not competent to manage high-value assets. I let the paper fall and sat on the edge of the bed. The world tilted, but only for a moment. I'd learned how to face storms without crying out. After a few breaths, I steadied myself, photographed every page, then slid them into the envelope I'd brought, sealed it, and wrote in red pen, "Evidence, do not touch." I stood, straightened my coat, and headed out. From the porch, Helen's voice rang clear over the phone. "Don't worry, the doctor will sign in the morning. Once we have the dementia note, the transfer will be easy." Alan already agreed. The words cut like a blade, not because they confirmed the plot, but because they confirmed that Alan was in it. The boy I'd trusted most. I don't remember how I left the room. I only know that as I came down the stairs, my hands were ice cold but my head clear. Verity looked at me and sniped, "Find what you needed?" I smiled so gently it made her hesitate. "Yes, I found what I needed." I stepped outside. The wind was stronger now, sea salt stinging my lips. I opened the trunk and pulled out a brown leather notebook, the asset log I've kept for 20 years. I turned to a new page and carefully wrote, March 15th. Discovered forged documents. Dr. L. Patterson capacity certification. Involved parties: Alan Monroe, Helen Reed, Verity Reed. Missing jewelry: 3 items. Deed file compromised. Secret compartment pried. I closed the book, set down my pen, then took out a smaller notebook, my black book of damages. On the first page, I wrote a single line: "They think I'll stay quiet. They forget the quiet, remember the longest." Before leaving Cape May, I looked back at the house one last time. Through the glass, Helen was still on the phone, gesturing like everything was under control. She had no idea that minutes earlier, I'd walked out not only with evidence but with the beginning of their downfall. I started the car. The old engine rasped to life, blending with the ocean wind. The sun-splashed road led me toward town, where I'd meet Ethan Carver in the morning. I rolled down the window and let the cold, clean air hit my face. Inside me there was no longer pain, only clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew from the moment I found that paper, the fight had officially begun. The next morning, the Cape May sun was bright and clear, as if it meant to wash away yesterday's grime. I got up early, brewed coffee in the little motel room, and sat at the desk. In front of me were 2 notebooks, asset log and black book of damages. I opened a new page and neatly listed the day's tasks: bank, attorney, insurance, data backups, and a formal report. Each line appeared steady, like the stitches I used to make to keep a seam straight. Not a single line out of place. I drove to Atlantic First Bank, where I've saved for more than 10 years. The two-story white building and the palms lining the path looked the same. When I stepped through the glass door, the smell of polished wood and the hum of the money counter calmed me. Behind the counter, Miss Margaret Doyle, the branch manager, looked up and recognized me immediately. "Jeanette, how long has it been? Still doing well?" I smiled lightly, but kept my tone firm. "I need a private conversation, Margaret, about my accounts. As soon as possible." She understood and led me to a small conference room. Once the door closed, I lowered my voice. "There's a chance someone is trying to access or exploit my accounts. I need to block all third-party access, including family." Margaret frowned. "Is something going on, Jeanette?" I answered simply, "I believe my assets are under threat, and I want to be one step ahead." Without another word, she started working the system. The screen's blue glow reflected off her silver frames. I watched, remembering how I've trusted this bank for years, depositing money with a shaky hand, afraid to mistype, then leaving reassured that the future was safe. Turns out, nothing is truly safe if you hand too much trust to others. Margaret printed a stack and handed it to me. "This confirms access blocks and automatic alerts for unusual activity. You'll get notifications immediately for any withdrawal over $500 or any outbound transfer." I nodded, signed, then said, "Next, I need an official letter from the bank stating that I am fully financially competent, mentally sound, transparent, and actively managing all my assets. Please date it today." Margaret looked surprised but didn't pry. Maybe she understood enough. As she printed the letter, I saw her expression change from curious to respectful. "I'll sign and stamp it right now. Jeanette, you're not only smart, you're remarkably composed. Many people would panic in this situation. You don't." I smiled. "I've survived 2 financial crises and losing my husband. A little betrayal from a daughter-in-law won't break me." Then we reviewed everything I had. Savings, $92,000. Certificates of deposit, $18,000. Checking, $9,500. She read. I carefully noted it down. Total, $119,500. Enough to fund a long legal battle if I had to. Before I left, Margaret said, "I know an attorney named Ethan Carver specializes in protecting seniors' assets. Ethical man. He's helped many older clients keep their homes after scams. You should see him." I nodded. "I've heard of him. In fact, I already have an appointment, but thank you for the confirmation, Margaret." Leaving the bank felt like finishing the first wall of a fortress. Now I needed ammunition. I stopped by Atlantic Mutual, my insurer, where I'd once declared the value of my mother's jewelry. A young woman in her 20s with a polite smile took me in. "I need to update a theft claim," I said evenly. 3 items: a rose gold wedding band, a pearl necklace, and an Elgin pocket watch. All missing from my home. She logged into the system. "Do you have photos or original receipts?" Of course. I handed over a USB with photos and scanned receipts from 2003. As she took it, I saw something in my own reflection, not a victim, but someone in control of the fight. I asked them to email a theft acknowledgement with estimated value. Insurance would take a few weeks, but for me, the point was that everything left a lawful trail. At noon, I went back to the motel and spread everything across the table. Photos of the home intrusion, crumpled deed papers, photos of the Pride secret compartment, the draft property transfer, the forged medical certification, video of Helen laughing on the porch saying, "The doctor will sign in the morning." I plugged the new external drive into my laptop, saved everything, and named the folder Case HM. Fraud, 2025. I backed up each file 3 ways, one on the drive, one in the cloud, and one sent to a private email only I know the password for. When I was done, I brewed more coffee and opened my 3rd notebook, the detailed report. I started writing, line by line, neat and complete, leaving out no timestamp. March 13th. Returned to the house, found it occupied by Helen and her family. March 14th. Discovered forged documents, overheard a call about the doctor signing the certification. March 15th. Went to the bank, froze accounts, received a letter confirming my financial capacity. Material damages: 3 pieces of jewelry, damaged furniture, forged paperwork, emotional harm, home invasion, public humiliation. I wrote to the bottom of the page, paused, and took a deep breath. My pen shook slightly as I wrote the closing line: goal, take back the house, seek justice, and make Helen and Alan understand that filial piety can't be bought with deception. When I looked up, the clock read a little after 3 p.m. I packed the files into my leather bag and checked each envelope, one for the bank, one for insurance, and one for the attorney. Everything was so orderly, it made me feel strangely calm. The sky turned amber as I drove to Ethan Carver's office downtown. A limestone building with a modest sign: Carver and Associates, Elder Law and Estate Protection. Inside, it was so quiet I could hear the wall clock. The receptionist led me to a waiting room that smelled of oak and fresh roasted coffee. I sat with my hands on the file stack, feeling like I was stepping into a new phase of life, no longer the insulted mother, but the plaintiff. When the clock struck 4 p.m., the door opened. A man around 50, tall, salt and pepper hair, bright eyes, and a warm, steady voice. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm Ethan Carver. Please come in." I stood, shook his hand, and felt a firm grip. For the first time in days, I felt trust. I set the files on the desk and slid them toward him. "This is everything I have. Photos, documents, audio, and video. I believe my son's family is trying to steal my property using forged paperwork." Mr. Carver nodded, said nothing, and flipped through each page. When he reached the copy of the medical certification, his eyes darkened. "This rises to serious medical document forgery. You did exactly the right thing by preserving the evidence." I answered quietly, "I'm not looking for a war, but I won't be erased from my own life." Ethan Carver studied me for a moment, then said, "You have something most clients don't: preparation. With this evidence, we're not only protecting your house, we can hold them legally accountable." I nodded, my voice rough but clear. "Mr. Carver, I spent my life raising one child. Now I'll spend the rest teaching him about consequences." He smiled and offered his hand. "Then we begin here, Mrs. Monroe." And in that moment, I understood the doors that slammed in my face yesterday were starting to open. Not the house door, but the door to justice. In Ethan Carver's office, the afternoon turned honey gold. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and reflected off the oak desk where my files sat in order. Every sheet, every photo, every recording was a piece of the truth, and for the first time, I wasn't just a mother who'd been insulted. I was a witness to my own life. Carver sat across from me, turning pages with steady hands, eyes narrowing whenever something stood out. When he stopped at the medical certification, I saw his brows knit. "Mrs. Monroe," he said slowly, "this is unequivocal proof of medical document forgery. They didn't just trespass. They tried to strip you of your decision-making by inventing incapacity. That's a serious crime." I kept my composure and simply nodded. "I guess they thought I was too old to notice." He looked up and studied me, then replied, "The truth is, most victims never catch it in time. But you did. You collected evidence like a pro." Carver opened his laptop and started entering data. He read aloud as he typed: as if he wanted me to hear each step of justice being set in motion. This case covers 4 charges. 1. Trespass on private property. 2. Forgery of medical and legal documents. 3. Intent to defraud a senior's assets. 4. Theft of personal property of value. I'll file both civil and criminal actions. Within 48 hours, we can request an emergency eviction order from the Cape May County Court. After that, I'll file a separate complaint with the New Jersey Medical Board for the forged medical certification. He paused and looked at me. But I should tell you, once these orders are issued, the chance of reconciliation with your son is slim. I was quiet for a few seconds. The question pulled up images of Alan as a child, the tow-headed boy who fell asleep over homework, the one I carried all night when he had a fever. Then I remembered him standing still while Helen insulted me without saying a word in my defense. I lifted my head, calm. If a bond is held together by money, cutting it only makes the load lighter. Carver looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I'll need your signature on a power of attorney so I can act on your behalf. I took the pen and signed without hesitation. A moment later, Carver called someone, his voice low and decisive. Inspector Rossi, I've got a trespass and forged medical documentation case in Cape May. The victim is Mrs. Jeanette Monroe, 70 years old. I'll email all the evidence through a secure channel. Please prep an enforcement team. We may need on-site support within 48 hours. The voice on the other end was deep and crisp. Understood. I'll handle it personally. Carver set the phone down and turned back to me. Inspector Rossi used to work major property crime investigations. You'll be in good hands. Once the order is approved, we'll coordinate enforcement by the book, by the law. No one will be able to twist it. I nodded, feeling a strange warmth. It had been a long time since I felt protected not by family, but by the law itself. Carver continued reviewing, his voice even and precise, like a conductor. After we file for eviction, I'll also request a temporary freeze on any disposition of your property, meaning they can't sell, rent, or mortgage the house during the investigation. Second, I'll move for a restraining order to keep Helen and Alan at least 100 meters away from you. Finally, I'll request preservation of all evidence at the scene for trial. I listened, feeling both sad and relieved. Mr. Carver, I said softly, I always thought the law only worked for people who could afford the best lawyers. Turns out, sometimes justice does find its way to those who need it. He smiled gently, eyes kind but sharp. No, Mrs. Monroe, justice doesn't find anyone on its own. This time, you stood up so it could see you. When all the paperwork was signed, I opened my bag and pulled out 2 more envelopes. One with stills from the Helen video, and one with the audio recording I saved last night. Here, I said, sliding them over. You can hear her clearly. The doctor will sign in the morning. I think it will bolster the forged medical angle. Carver nodded and flagged the file in red. Spoken evidence carries a lot of weight, especially paired with a concrete act. We'll use this as the keystone to open an investigation into Dr. Patterson. I nodded and looked out the window. The sun was dipping, throwing an orange glow across the opposite wall. Maybe Helen was still laughing at that house, thinking she'd won. I murmured, mostly to myself. She'll learn when a mother stays silent too long. When she finally speaks, it will be the last word. On the way back, I stopped by Blue Wave Coastal Cleaning, the company that used to service my house years ago. The manager, Marie, recognized me immediately. Jeanette, how long has it been since you were in Cape May? I smiled. Long enough for someone else to take over my house. I need a full, clean, deodorize, change linens, scrub floors, everything. But only after I confirm the eviction order's been executed. I want that house to breathe again, like it was never violated." Marie froze for a second, then said softly, "Call me when you're ready." "I'll bring the whole crew." I nodded. "I'll call, and I want to pay double. Not for comfort, I need to feel the house breathe again." Then I stopped by the hardware store across the street and found Bill, the man who installed my first locks on that house. "I need every lock replaced, Bill," I said. "Fight with someone, Jeanette?" he joked. I gave a thin smile. "No. I just realized. Some doors stay open too long, and all you get is bad wind blowing in." He softened. "I get it. Call me when the order's done. I'll come right over." That evening, I returned to the motel. On the table, all the papers were neatly arranged, each sealed envelope numbered. I opened my small notebook, pulled out a blank sheet, and began a handwritten letter. The first line, carefully penned, "To my 2 grandchildren, Lucy and Ben." I wrote slowly, letting each word sink into the page like a final lesson. If one day you hear adults say your grandmother turned cold, that she stopped loving the family, remember this: love doesn't mean having no boundaries. I loved your father with all my heart, but love must not be used to trample someone's self-respect. Sometimes, protecting yourself is how you show others the value of integrity. One day, when you're older, come to Cape May. Sit on the front steps and listen to the waves. If that house is still there, it means justice still exists, because I didn't give up. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote on the front, "Open only when you're grown." Outside the window, the streetlights cast warm gold onto the dew-wet sidewalk. I poured myself hot tea and sat quietly. Everything had started to move, not with shouting, but with paperwork, stamps, and signatures. I closed my eyes and listened to the distant surf. No more loud laughter. No more cigarette smoke or cheap perfume. Just me and the plan ahead, lighting up in my mind like lamps in the night. Tomorrow, the files will start speaking for me. That Tuesday morning, Cape May was windless, the ocean a mirror for the sky. I woke at 6 a.m., sat by the motel window, and watched the sun lift off the horizon. The coffee in my hand steamed, and I could feel my heart beating slow and steady, nothing like the chaos of the past few days. Today, everything would change. I put on the gray suit Richard liked best, fastened the buttons, slipped on my mother's old silver bracelet, and opened my briefcase thick with papers, photos, videos, recordings. Everything numbered, categorized, and neatly arranged. I was no longer old Mrs. Jeanette who got thrown out. I was Jeanette Monroe, plaintiff in a property invasion and family fraud case. When I arrived, Ethan Carver's black car was already at the gate. Next to it was Inspector Rossi's patrol car and an SUV with the notary and 2 legal staff. The team wore dark suits, faces serious, moving efficiently without small talk. I parked across the street and took a long breath. From a distance, my house, once my greatest pride, looked both familiar and strange. The railing was still there, but the curtains had been replaced with a cheap, blotchy set. I caught Helen's silhouette in the kitchen window, hair pinned tight, coffee in hand. She had no idea her world would collapse in minutes. Carver stepped over to open my door, his voice calm and firm. "Mrs. Monroe, we're ready. I've notified the court, and Rossi will execute the order within 2 hours. Everything will be recorded to protect you." I nodded and said softly, "I don't need them to fear me. I just need them to remember I still exist." When the patrol car stopped at the gate, the short chirp of the siren cut the quiet morning. Helen turned, her face changing color. A second later, the coffee cup slid from her hand and shattered on the tile. Verity, her sister, stepped onto the porch with her phone up, already recording. "What is this? You're invading our privacy," she screamed. Inspector Rossi advanced, his voice even and cold. "Ma'am, this is an emergency eviction order issued by the Cape May County Court. Any interference or unauthorized recording may be considered obstruction. All images taken today are admissible evidence." Verity blanched and maybe Sierra propped, stepped back. Helen came out, trying to steady herself, but her voice shook. "What is this? This is your son's house." "You have no right." Carver cut in, opened his case file, and read clearly. Under Section 2.31 of the New Jersey Personal Property Protection Act, Miss Helen Reed and her family members are identified as unlawfully entering and occupying property solely owned by Mrs. Jeanette Monroe. Additionally, there is evidence of forged medical documentation and intent to defraud a senior's assets. You have exactly 2 hours to pack and vacate the premises. His words rolled through the damp salt air crisp, like a verdict. Helen went pale, forcing a weak smile. "You're joking, right? I'm the lawful daughter-in-law. This is—" Carver raised the court-stamped order and said flatly, "No one jokes with the law, ma'am." 2 hours. Starting now. I stood behind them and quietly stepped onto the porch. The smell of salt mixed with fresh toner from the newly printed order. Helen saw me, and in that instant, her face shifted from surprise to real fear. What are you doing?" I just smiled. "Taking back what's mine." Right then, Alan pulled up, likely after a warning call. He braked hard and jumped out, face white, shirt wrinkled. Mom, this is a misunderstanding, I swear." We just wanted." Carver raised a hand, stopping him, his voice cold and precise like a ticking second hand. "Mr. Alan Monroe, by order of the Cape May County Court, you are summoned as an accessory in senior asset fraud, specifically agreeing to sign an unlawful transfer draft. Here is your summons. You have 3 days to appear, or you will be compelled." Alan froze. Helen ran to him, grabbed his hand and screamed, "You have to say your mom is senile. You have to say she's not competent. That's why we did all this. If you don't, we lose everything." I suddenly understood why so many older people stay silent. Not because they're weak, but because they don't want to lose their children. If you've ever witnessed or heard words that cut your heart like that, please share below. Maybe together we can figure out how to keep things like this from happening again. I looked at the two of them and felt no rage, only a cold, stony emptiness. I slowly opened my case, pulled a file, and took out the first page. Forged medical report, Dr. L. Patterson. I held it up, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "This doctor's name? Sound familiar?" Helen went rigid. Alan dropped his gaze. Rossi signaled his officers to keep filming. A heavy silence fell for a few seconds, only the distant surf and the ticking from the wall clock inside. Then chaos started. Helen shouted upstairs to the kids, "Pack up, now!" Verity cursed under her breath and yanked a suitcase. A child wailed, the sobs echoing down the hallway. I heard suitcase wheels scraping, things thudding to the floor, and cheap perfume wafting across the stairs. Rossi stood squarely at the door, stopwatch in hand, his voice carrying, 1 hour and 40 minutes remaining. Helen spun back, shrieking, "You can't kick us out in the middle of the day!" Carver answered evenly, "The law doesn't keep business hours when someone violates lawful ownership. You had choices. You chose wrong." I stood by the railing and watched it all like a play reaching its final scene. The people who mocked me, who called me a parasite, were scrambling in fear. But I felt no joy, only peace. The peace of someone who finished a battle without raising her voice. Alan edged closer, eyes bloodshot. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. Helen said it was just paperwork to protect your assets from strangers." I cut in. "Strangers, Alan? Then who forged my medical record? Who said I'm senile? Who signed the transfer draft? Did I do that myself? He lowered his head. Silent. Helen panted and snapped. Don't listen to her. She's making it up. Who knows if her mind is even clear? Carver tossed a letter on the table, the bank's competency and financial management confirmation signed by Miss Doyle. His voice was firm. Mrs. Monroe is fully competent and actively managing her assets. This is sufficient to invalidate any incapacity claim. Miss Helen, you're used to lying, but this time every word is on record. And it will play in court. Helen opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. The air in the house turned heavy. I heard Rossi remind us quietly, 1 hour left. They scrambled to pack, children's cries mixing with suitcase wheels scraping the wood floor. I stood and looked at the room that had once been our Christmas gathering place, now a post-war battlefield, littered with chaos. I walked slowly toward the window frame. Outside, the sea wind whipped my hair, carrying the smell of salt, dampness, and the past. In the glass, I saw the reflection of a silver-haired woman, standing straight in the middle of the turmoil and smiling. 2 hours passed, neither fast nor slow. Every minute, every second was another slice of justice finishing its work. When Rossi checked his watch and said, "Time's up," I gave a small nod. Helen held the kids, Verity dragged a suitcase, and Alan went last, walking slowly with his head down. No one said a word. They went out the gate into the glare of midday light, so bright no one dared look back. I stood on the steps, still holding the forged medical file, and listened to the iron gate close. The sound landed like a period at the end of a long chapter, 2 hours of truth, and I knew that from that moment on, this house was mine again. After 2 hours of chaos and the clang of the gate, the front yard fell into silence. The ocean breeze swept through, carrying the smell of damp sand and tears. I stood on the steps, watching their figures fade along. The coastal road. The police, the notary, and the legal staff left one by one, leaving only me, Carver, and Rossi. I thought I'd feel relief instead. There was a strange emptiness. I had taken back the house, but I'd lost something else, the illusion that mother and child love can fix every wrong. Rossi did one last sweep of the house. He took careful notes, marked every item, then came back. "Nothing was taken, ma'am. All your property is intact. We'll file a full report." I nodded with a faint smile. "Thank you, Inspector. Justice rarely makes noise, but when it arrives, it's beautiful." He gave a polite nod and left, and it was just Carver and me in the yard. While gathering the paperwork, Carver said, "Everything went according to plan. But be ready, Alan may try to negotiate." I sighed softly. I raised him for 30 years. I know what he'll do before he thinks of it. Not long after, just as Carver predicted, a familiar engine sound echoed. Alan's silver sedan stopped a few yards from the gate. He got out, shoulders rigid, eyes full of panic. Helen stayed in the car, head down, gripping her purse. Alan walked up and stopped a few steps from me. "Mom, can we talk alone?" Carver started to step in, but I raised a hand. "It's all right. I'll hear him." We stood on the porch, in salt air and harsh sunlight. Alan began, his voice small. "Mom, I know this has gone too far. If you'll drop the case, we'll leave right now. The house is still yours." "We won't take anything." I looked straight at my son with a calm that kept him from meeting my eyes. "What about the forged papers, Alan? The affidavit saying I'm senile? The insults I heard from the porch? And your grandmother's jewelry Helen took who knows where?" Alan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For a moment I saw regret in his eyes, smothered by fear. He lowered his head. "Mom, the paperwork. That was Helen. I didn't know. Everything. I cut in, my voice low but sharp. You didn't have to do anything. You stayed silent. And sometimes, Silence is the worst guilt of all. Alan stepped back, fists clenched. You don't understand. I'm in deep debt. Credit cards, the kids' tuition, the mortgage. Helen panicked. She thought if you signed the house over, we could borrow against it to pay down what we owe. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just wanted— I gave a small, dry laugh. You just wanted to solve a family problem by betraying the person who gave you life? He went quiet. I stepped closer, eyes fixed on the face I'd once been so proud of when it was still a little boy's. Alan, are you going to teach your kids that betraying their grandmother is for the family? Are you going to tell Lucy and Ben that lying, forging, and taking what isn't yours is how you protect your own? He swallowed, his voice breaking. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would turn out like this. From the car, Helen suddenly flung the door open, her shrill voice slicing through his words. Shut up, Alan, stop begging her. She just wants to humiliate us. I'll countersue for age discrimination and emotional abuse. Everyone will know she kicked her own son out. Carver stepped forward, his voice low and winter cold. Thank you, Miss Helen. That threat will be added to the case file under evidence of elder abuse and unlawful legal intimidation. If you'd like, I can file the memo today. Helen froze, face drained, but still tried to strike back. You'll regret this. I have the right. Carver didn't let her finish. He held a document up, voice calm and icy. The only right you have left is to leave in an orderly manner. Alan lifted his head, eyes lost. Mom, please, don't do this. We can't survive this lawsuit. I'll give the house back. I'll return everything you lost. I'm just asking. I looked my son in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I felt a cord snap, one that could never be knotted again. No, Alan, I said slowly. If I forgive you today, tomorrow you'll believe betrayal can be excused by love. I don't want to see you go to jail, but I will not let you think I'm so weak you can rob me, and I'll still smile. I paused, holding his gaze. Leave. See me in court. Alan started to speak, but Helen yanked his arm hard. Let's go! There's nothing here for us anymore, she screamed, tears mixing with fury. Carver stepped back to give them space, but spoke loud enough for Rossi and the notary to hear. Please re-inventory all property before they go. Nothing belonging to Mrs. Monroe may be removed. Rossi moved in at once, another officer opening the prepared list. They checked every box and suitcase. Suitcase wheels rasped over wood, mingled with 2 children crying in the car. Helen shouted, You're going through my things. Rossi answered flatly, We're ensuring the law isn't violated a second time. Alan stood still, eyes rimmed red. When Rossi finished reading the list, he said, Nothing of Mrs. Monroe's was taken. Documents, jewelry, personal items all accounted for. I nodded and murmured, Thank you, Inspector. Helen slammed the car door and tossed her bag inside, tears boiling with rage. Alan hesitated a second and looked back at me. Mom, if I lose everything, will that make you happy? I looked at him, my heart twisting, but my voice steady. No, Alan. I won't be happy. But some pain has to happen so people learn the value of what's right. He said nothing. Helen snapped, Drive! At last, he turned away and walked to the car without another word. As the sedan rolled out the gate, a fine plume of dust lifted, sunlight flashing off the glass. I saw 2 little faces in the back seat pressed to the window. A tear slid down the quote. Glass I didn't know whose. The tires crunched over the gravel, the sound fading, then vanishing at the last bend. Only the surf and the salt air remained. Carver stood beside me, closing his case, his voice low. It's done, Mrs. Monroe. I watched the dust hang in the light. No, Mr. Carver, I answered softly. It's only just begun. Then I turned and stepped into the house, where the smells of sand, wood, and freedom were mixing in the air, a home reclaimed with tears and with justice. The next morning, as the first light hit the window frame, I heard a truck stop at the gate. The Blue Wave cleaning service arrived right on time. 6 people in ocean blue uniforms, white gloves on, climbed out with toolboxes, cleaners, and fresh cloths. Marie, the manager who spoke with me a few days earlier, came up, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll start in the living room, Mrs. Monroe. Would you like to stay and supervise?" I nodded. I want to witness everything, not just cleaning the house, erasing the traces of a dark chapter. Marie understood. She asked no more questions and sent the team through the house. Brooms, vacuums, and running water sounded in every room. I followed them, watching and photographing every corner with a small camera, not to remember, but to document for the insurance file. The living room, once the heart of so many holidays, looked like a post-storm battlefield. The hand-stitched rug I'd ordered from Savannah was stained with wine and grease. The brown leather sofa had a long cut, and the coffee table was scratched across the grain. I sat on the edge of the chair and touched the tier, feeling both pain and chill. I remembered the day Richard and I picked that table. He laughed. "We'll sit here in our old people coffee days and argue about who washes the mugs." Now it was just me and a memory smeared over. Marie bent to work at a stain, her voice soft. "This will come out, ma'am. It just takes time and patience." I gave a sad smile. People are like that too. Out in the yard, it was worse. The lawn was trampled, geranium pots snapped, and the row of trees along the path stripped bare. I stood still. I'd planted these when Alan was 8. Each root held a memory. I turned to the worker, pulling weeds. "Leave the roots, don't rip them up. They'll grow back, even if it's slow." He nodded. Back in the kitchen, I saw scratched appliances, a filthy sink, and grease on the wall. They scrubbed every corner, swapped the filters, polished the wood floors. The scent of cleaner and lemon brightened the room. I breathed deep. It felt like cleansing an old wound. It stung, but it was necessary. The bedroom stopped me the longest. The sheets were stained, the wardrobe hung open, things scattered. I started inventorying. Sweaters, scarves, frames, a jewelry box. I opened the second drawer where I kept what mattered most. When I saw the bare space, I knew what I feared had happened. The wedding album gone. My father's pocket watch gone, too. I froze, my heart tightening. In my head, I heard his warm laugh the day I graduated. "Never let people measure you by watches or diamonds. They're worth anything only if you keep your self-respect." I closed the drawer, my hand shaking. Marie was nearby, saw my face pale, and asked quietly, "Something missing, Mrs. Monroe?" I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Just 2 things, but it's a lifetime." I took a photo of the empty drawer and time-stamped it. More proof for the claim. But to me, this loss didn't translate to money. Some things don't belong to the material world, they belong to the soul. At noon, Bill the locksmith arrived. "Jeanette, all of them or just the front door?" "All of them," I said firmly. "Front, windows, shed, bedroom." He nodded, installed bright new locks, and handed me the key ring. "From now on, only you hold the day. Originals. I won't keep a copy." I gripped the keys. The metal was cool and solid, a small symbol of control, something I'd been denied too long. That afternoon, the tech crew put in a camera system around the house. 6 hidden placements, 2 at the gate, 1 on the porch, 1 in the hallway, 2 in back. When the test screen came up, every angle was covered. I smiled. If anyone tries to come again, they'll have to look themselves in the eye. That evening, I sat in my study, surrounded by open files. I finished the insurance claim package, damage list, photo evidence, Rossi's report, Blue Wave certification, each page signed, stamped, clipped in order. I emailed the electronic copy, then closed the laptop. My phone buzzed. A message from Carver. Mrs. Monroe. Latest update. Dr. L. Patterson has been suspended by the State Medical Board. Preliminary findings show he issued multiple paid incapacity certifications in similar cases. Police are expanding a criminal investigation, and your case will be the starting point. I read it twice, then again, feeling sea air rush my chest. Not joy, the restoration of order. A small part of the world had just been set right. I texted back short, "Thank you, Mr. Carver. We don't need a quick win, just a true one." When everyone left, the house felt unusually quiet. I walked the hallway barefoot, the wood cool under my feet. No more loud laughter, no more cheap smoke, no more sandy shoe prints on the rug. Only me and the old house breathing again. I stopped at the desk and took the brown leather journal, the one I'd kept since the day I was thrown out. I opened a fresh page and wrote in fountain pen, "I'm not taking revenge. I'm restoring fairness." I set the pen down and watched the ink dry. It wasn't an excuse. It was a declaration. I'd learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's refusing to let pain steer you anymore. That afternoon, I called attorney Carver once more. "Mr. Carver, I want to amend my will." His voice was steady on the line. "Who would you like to receive the property?" I didn't hesitate. "To a foundation protecting seniors from financial and psychological abuse. I don't want this house to be bait for greed again. Let it become a safe place for people treated like me." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's a courageous decision, Mrs. Monroe." I smiled. "Not courage, Mr. Carver. Justice needs a roof." When night fell, I went out to the porch. The ocean wind blew stronger, salty and cold, but carrying the scent of freedom. A mug of herbal tea steamed on the table. I stared into the dark and listened to the steady crash of waves. The house was clean. Floors gleamed. Walls were bright. Doors locked. But inside me, there was still a cold space, not from the wind, but from memories not yet faded. I pulled a light blanket over my shoulders and sat still, hearing the wind hiss through the palms. Somewhere, a gull called hoarsely in the night. I closed my eyes and whispered, "People can wipe away dust, but not memory. You just live with it and make it lighter." That night, Cape May was so peaceful it felt unreal. But I knew behind that calm, another swell was rising. Justice was moving in, and this time it wouldn't be late. 3 weeks after the eviction, Cape May settled back into its old quiet. Sea breeze slipped across the porch, and waves ticked like a clock in a house newly revived. I thought the old doors of the past had shut until the phone rang mid-afternoon. The caller ID showed a name, Verity. Her voice was hoarse and shaky, nothing like her former arrogance. "Mrs. Monroe, it's me, Verity. I'm calling because Helen is close to bankruptcy. Accounts frozen, credit card debt piling up, that doctor is under investigation, and Alan—" She stopped and swallowed. "Alan lost his job. They're about to lose their house. Please, please drop the lawsuit. Helen can't take any more." I kept my voice even, eyes on the far line of the sea where foam fell and rose again. "Tell me the truth, Verity. Are you calling to make amends or for money?" Silence on the line for a few beats, only wind hissing through the speaker. Then she answered, barely above a whisper, "Maybe. Both." I hung up without promises. Some wounds can't be treated with rushed apologies. 2 days later, as evening laid gold over the water, Helen showed up. An old car stopped at the gate, no longer gleaming like when she used to arrive here triumphant. The door opened, and Helen stepped out thinner, pale, hair a mess, makeup smeared. In her hands was a worn black leather bag, heavy. I opened the door without a word. She stood at the steps, hesitant like a stranger. Could I have a few minutes?" I nodded silently and stepped aside. Helen came in and stood in the living room, now shining clean. Her eyes moved around and stopped at the leather sofa with its new cover. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Everything's so clean. Cleaner than before." I answered, "Yes. Dust is easy to wipe. Damage isn't." Helen lowered her head, still gripping the bag. Then she set it on the wooden table in the middle of the room, pulled the zipper, and in the dim afternoon light, familiar items appeared. My father's silver pocket watch, engraved WM 1942. My mother's pearl necklace, glowing a pale gold, my old wedding ring with Richard, the one I thought was gone forever. I held my breath, looking at them, feeling for a moment like the past had walked back in. Helen spoke, her voice rough. "We found them in the back storage. I know, we were wrong. I brought them back because I can't take this anymore. Everything's falling apart. Alan says you chose money over family." I looked up and met her eyes. "Family doesn't cheat each other, Helen. And love doesn't need fake papers to prove itself." Helen's shoulders sagged and tears fell. She sat on the chair, hands shaking. We were truly desperate. A cheap lawyer said if we had a medical certificate, we could make the transfer legal. I didn't think it was a crime. I just wanted money to pay debts and keep the kids in school. I thought you wouldn't find out. I stayed quiet and let her talk. Her voice broke, breaths coming fast. "Alan isn't as strong as you think. He didn't know how to say no to me. I pushed him away from you. She covered her face and sobbed. Watching her, I felt no joy. I saw a woman who had been arrogant, now crushed by her own greed. I spoke softly, each word clear. "Helen, ignorance isn't innocent when it harms other people. A bad lawyer, a fake doctor, financial pressure, all of that is understandable. None of it justifies taking someone else's dignity." She looked up, eyes swollen, voice small like a lost child. "Will you never forgive me?" I answered slowly, gentle but sharp as a blade. "Forgiveness isn't canceling a debt. Forgiveness is refusing to let hatred run your life. I did that already when I stopped crying." Helen bent down and took another envelope from the bag. "This is the inventory receipt for returning the property. I've signed it, and I'm willing to confirm it in court. I just ask you, please don't send Alan to prison. He's just weak." I looked at the envelope, then at her. "Helen, I'm not out for revenge, but justice can't be priced in tears. I'll turn all of this over to Attorney Carver. The court will decide, not me." She nodded as tears streamed down her cheeks. I opened the bag, took out each piece of jewelry, checked them, and signed the receipt. My hand didn't shake, but my heart felt heavy. There's a strange kind of pain in holding what used to be yours, not because of its value, but because of how it came back. When it was done, I closed the file. I've received the items, but I'm not dropping the case. Helen looked at me, pleading, trembling. "Is there any way to start over? I know everything was wrong, but if I could do it again, I'd rather live poor than live a lie." I studied her for a long moment. In that worn-out face, I caught a glimpse of the real person, a woman who had been a wife, a mother, a daughter-in-law before greed turned her into someone else. I said slowly, "Helen, starting over doesn't mean going back to where you were. Some trees, once snapped by a storm, can only grow again somewhere else, not in the garden they tore apart." She bit her lip, tears dropping onto the ring. I had just gotten back. I said nothing more. She stood, bowed her head, and walked slowly to the door. At the porch, she stopped and whispered, barely audible, "You don't know. Alan still says your name in his sleep." Then she left, carrying an empty bag and swollen eyes. When the sound of her car faded, I sat at the table and looked at the things in front of me. The last light of the day fell on the pearls, throwing tiny reflections on the ceiling. I reached out and touched my father's old silver watch, feeling the metals chill on my skin. Time had moved on, but the ticking stayed steady, a reminder that everything runs in cycles, and justice doesn't need to hurry, only to be sure. I opened my notebook and wrote the last line of that day's entry. Today, Helen came with a black bag. I got back what was taken, but my heart didn't feel lighter. Because some things, once lost even when returned, are never whole again. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The waves were still rolling like nothing had happened. I whispered to myself, my voice rough but steady, "No victory makes people happy. Only waking up brings peace." Then I cleared the table, put the items back in a new wooden drawer, and locked it carefully. The house fell quiet again, with only my father's clock ticking like the heartbeat of a home given back after too many seasons of betrayal. 3 months after the afternoon Helen brought the black bag, the case officially went to trial at the Cape May County Courthouse. The day was colder than usual, gray clouds covering the sky, as if nature also wanted to witness a final chapter of truth. I wore my old gray suit and pinned on the small brooch from Richard, the one I keep with me whenever I need courage. The courtroom was unusually full. People from town filled the back rows, along with a few local reporters. Helen sat with her head down, hair falling over half her face. Alan sat beside her, hands clenched tight. Both looked noticeably thinner. I looked at them, not angry, not tender, just one clear feeling. Every action has a price. Attorney Carver presented clean and firm. Your Honor, the defendants intentionally forged medical documents to seize the plaintiff's property and also trespassed and interfered with personal belongings. We have evidence including audio recordings, scene photos, and testimony from the doctor who took money to falsify records. On the other side, the defense lawyer managed only a weak attempt. They had no ill intent. It was just a misunderstanding of the legal process. The judge, a silver-haired man with a calm but firm voice, reviewed each file, then said, "Misunderstanding is not an excuse for fraud. Especially when the target is an elderly person who trusted the defendants as close family." The verdict came after 2 hours. Defendants Alan Monroe and Helen Reed are each fined $25,000, sentenced to 200 hours of community service, and placed on 2 years of supervised probation. All forged medical records are void. Dr. Leonard Patterson is criminally charged with forgery and bribery. The courtroom went silent. Helen burst into tears. Alan bowed his head, hands trembling. I sat still. My heart didn't cheer. Justice doesn't arrive with a victory song, only with the quiet of what's right being put back where it belongs. After the hearing, Carver walked beside me down the steps. He said softly, "Mrs. Monroe, they'll end up paying more than $50,000 in court costs and legal fees. And you won your case fully." I smiled a little, not proud, just steady. "I didn't come to win, Mr. Carver. I came to prove that seniors aren't prey." He nodded, respect in his eyes. "And you did." 3 days later, the Cape May Chronicle ran a small front-page story. 70-year-old woman wins case against family's property fraud, a strong message for justice and seniors' rights. Below the headline was a photo of me leaving the courthouse, keys in hand, Carver behind me. They wrote that Jeanette Monroe's smile wasn't a winner's grin, but the look of someone who found herself again. I finished reading, folded the paper, and set it on the table, feeling neither pride nor sadness. I thought about others, people living through the same thing without evidence, without a lawyer, without a voice. A week later, I accepted an invitation to the Cape May Community Center for a talk on financial safety for seniors. When the director asked if I could share my story, I hesitated for a second and then nodded. That evening, the small room held more than 30 people, mostly older faces, gray hair, eyes edged with doubt. I stood before them with no notes and no speech. I just told the story plainly, without polish. I used to think love was enough to protect everything, but sometimes blind love is the very door that lets others walk in and take what's most precious. I learned that protecting your assets isn't a lack of trust, it's respect for the work of your whole life. The room was silent. Some wiped away tears, others nodded. Afterward, dozens came up to ask about wills, how to check documents, how to open separate accounts. An elderly woman held my hand, voice shaking. "Mrs. Jeanette, my daughter used my name to borrow from the bank. Now they want to take my house. What do I do?" My heart tightened. I knew that pain better than anyone. Start by documenting everything, taking photos of everything. And don't be afraid. Justice only comes to those who don't stay silent. That night at home, I opened my computer and created a new file. I titled it 10-Step Guide to Protecting Your Assets in Later Life. I wrote through the night. 1. Keep copies of every important document. 2. Never sign anything you haven't read line by line. 3. Always have a witness or lawyer for property transactions. 4. Set automatic alerts for every bank transaction. 5. Record all discussions about assets. 6. Update your will regularly. 7. Don't let anyone help you open accounts. 8. Trust your gut. If it feels wrong, it usually is. 9. If threatened, contact a lawyer or local authorities. 10. And finally, silence never protects you. When I typed the last line, the clock was near midnight. Outside, the ocean kept beating the shore, reminding me that at any age, we need to hold on to our right to be in charge of our own lives. A few days later, an envelope showed up in the mailbox by the road. The handwriting was messy but familiar. Alan Monroe. I stood still a moment, then carried it inside. Inside was a letter, folded in half, the writing unsteady. "Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand the price of silence. Every night I think about the day you stood on the porch holding that fake certificate and looked at me like a stranger. I deserved it. I'm doing community service at the local nursing home now. I hear so many residents say their kids took their property with fake papers, just like I did. Every time I mop a floor, I think of the house in Cape May. And you by the window with your tea. I'm sorry, Mom. Not for losing money, but for losing myself. Alan." I read it, folded it, and put it in the drawer. No tears, no smile, just a long, quiet pause. I didn't write back. Sometimes silence is a boundary. Not out of hate, but because forgiveness doesn't mean returning to where you were. That night, I sat on the porch and turned on the little radio. The news mentioned my case as an example of a senior citizen's effort to fight asset abuse. I listened, then smiled, and set down my tea. Justice had come, not noisy, not glorious, just as simple and steady as the waves hitting the shore, patient, persistent, certain. I closed my eyes, feeling the sea wind in my gray hair, and thought, if one mother can stand up, maybe others will too. And when that happens, the truth won't stay buried in fear. The Cape May night was still. I heard the clock inside strike 12. Each chime a reminder, justice may come late, but it always comes to those who don't give up. Morning in Cape May was clear again, like there had never been a storm. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, laying soft gold strips on the freshly polished wood floor. I made a cup of coffee and walked to the small table by the window, the spot where I started my life over. Everything was in order, Papers in the drawer, files in the cabinet. The lawyer had completed the will changes for the Seniors Foundation. Life seemed calm. But that morning, as I tidied the bedroom and opened an old drawer to find a few handkerchiefs, my fingers touched a thin, yellowed envelope tucked behind the liner. I pulled it out. Inside were old photos of Alan. When he was 8, gappy teeth, messy hair, a smile bright as sunlight. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the first picture. Alan in the blue sweater I knit, holding a homemade kite. Back then he ran all over the yard shouting, "Look, Mom! My kite is higher than our house." I laughed, and then tears slipped down my cheeks before I noticed. The next photos were his 9th birthday, first day of school, the day he carried home a lost kitten begging to keep it. In every picture I saw the same look. Innocent, trusting, so full of love. I whispered, almost asking myself, where did we go wrong? The question echoed and faded. Maybe the answer lay somewhere in the years when I thought I was doing the right thing. I loved Alan with all my heart, but it was love without limits. I sheltered him, paid his debts, fixed his messes, cleared the path so he never had to learn responsibility. I called it a mother's sacrifice, but now I see. I took away his chance to learn consequences. I once believed that if you loved a child enough, he'd love you back the same way. But blind love can be the root of dependence. I spoke aloud, my voice low and slow. "Jeanette, people don't just go wrong from greed but from being forgiven too many times." I opened my journal and wrote on a fresh page, the lines steady and firm. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's stopping the bleeding. Some wounds, if you keep reopening them, only drain your heart. When they close, you can look at them without pain." I finished, closed the book, took a deep breath, and decided to do what many mothers do after a storm. Start loving again, but differently. It was the week of my grandkids' birthdays, Hannah and Micah. I wrapped their gifts, a small sewing kit in a daisy tin for Hannah, and herb seeds for Micah, the kind we can grow in pots. No cash envelopes, no fancy gifts, no notes to their parents. I wrote a small card, careful and neat, giving you things you can make with your own hands. I believe what you create yourself will stay with you longer than anything store-bought. I mailed the gifts and included a private note for Alan. "If the kids want to see me, bring them to Cape May. But you and Helen don't need to come. Let the children know love can exist without pretending." 3 days later, Alan replied with just, "I understand." On Sunday, Hannah and Micah arrived. They knocked on the door, wearing shy smiles. Hannah was 12, with brown curls and bright eyes just like her dad's when he was little. Micah was 8, holding a pot of soil, firing off questions non-stop. I hugged them both, my heart filling with a feeling I couldn't name. The house, once drowned in silence, rang again with children's voices, a sound I thought I'd lost for good. In the morning, I taught Hannah to sew. She fumbled, pricked her finger, and almost cried. I held her hand and smiled. "It's okay. A little pain helps you remember. Just like when you love someone, if you've never been hurt, you won't know how to keep it." Hannah looked at me and gave a small nod. In the afternoon, I planted herbs in the backyard with Micah. The little boy dug carefully and asked, "Grandma, do plants know who planted them?" I paused, then smiled. They do. Not with their heads, but with how they grow. Every time you care for them with love, they grow stronger. He looked up, eyes shining. "Like you and my dad?" I looked at the boy and felt my heart pinch. "Yes, the only difference is sometimes adults have to learn how to grow up all over again." That evening, I made a simple dinner: lemon-baked fish and whole-grain bread. The kids ate happily. Afterward, I brought out a photo box. "I want to show you a few things." I opened the album, and old photos of Alan appeared. Birthdays, graduation, the wedding day. Hannah stared and gently touched one. "This is my dad?" "Yes, he was your age here." I talked about their father in a soft voice without bitterness. He was very brave and worked hard for a scholarship. But life, pressure, and mistakes can wear people down. Sometimes they forget who they are. What matters is knowing when to stop and find the way back. Micah looked up and asked, innocent as ever, "Will my dad find his way back, Grandma?" I smoothed his hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I believe anyone who can still feel shame can still find the way home." After the two of them fell asleep, I sat alone at the table under a warm lamp. I wrote on the last page of that year's notebook and titled it Grandma's 3 Principles. 1. Respect. No one is too old or too young to learn how to respect others and themselves. 2. Honesty. Telling the truth can hurt someone, but lying hurts the soul. 3. No borrowing through deceit. You can repay money, but if you borrow trust and betray it, you lose it forever. I set the pen down and felt lighter as I looked at those 3 lines. Not because I felt right, but because I finally knew what I wanted to leave behind. Not money, not the house, a legacy of values. The next morning, Hannah and Micah said goodbye. I walked them to the gate and handed each a small notebook. Write down what you learn every week. Not grades, lessons. They nodded and hugged me for a long time. When the car carrying them disappeared around the bend, I went back to the porch and sat in the wicker chair, my tea still warm on the table. My eyes drifted to the drawer where I keep the album. I opened it and looked again at the photo of Alan at 8. That smile was as pure as the first day. And I understood. Some things, no matter how life twists them, stay whole in memory. Not because time preserves them, but because true love can't be stolen. It can only be forgotten. I smiled softly, closed the drawer, and heard the tiny click like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the waves kept rolling in, the sea breeze mixing with the steady tick of the clock inside the rhythm of life returning, ordinary, simple, enough. And I knew that from today, the old chapters had truly closed, not with tears, but with late clarity and a peace that finally had a place to rest. The April wind in Cape May carried a light salt scent, enough to dry the dew on the porch. I was trimming wild rose canes in the front yard when I heard a car stop at the gate. A door shut, and someone walked slowly up the brick path. Heavy steps, unhurried, uncertain. I looked up and saw Alan. It had been more than half a year since I last saw him at court. Now my son looked almost unrecognizable. Thinner, patchy beard, wrinkled shirt, dark circles like he hadn't slept in ages. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice rough and hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a bit?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. "If you're here to tell the truth." He swallowed hard and lowered his head. "That's all I've got." We sat on the porch with a small wooden table between us. The sea breeze brought the scent of salt and the roses I'd just cut. Alan stayed quiet a long time, not knowing where to start. I didn't push. Sometimes, silence is the only place a confession can find the way out. "Mom." His voice cracked. "I was wrong." I didn't respond. I just looked at him and waited. I signed those fake papers. Not because Helen forced me. Because I wanted to believe it would save my family. I was afraid of losing the house, losing the kids, afraid of being a failed husband. But I forgot you were the one who gave me everything to begin with. His voice tightened. I clenched my hands but still didn't interrupt. I heard Helen insult you that day, and I said nothing. I thought if I stayed quiet, your anger would fade and things would pass. I didn't understand that silence can be a kind of betrayal. I looked straight at him. The middle-aged face, the same boy who used to grin in those photos, now carried lines of exhaustion and regret. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I came because I want to live in a way that's worthy of it. I want you to know I'm changing." I set my teacup down and said quietly, "Alan, forgiveness takes time and proof of life. Words can't stitch up wounds caused by actions. You have to prove it by living differently." He nodded, eyes wet. "What do you want me to do?" I leaned back, thinking for a moment. Then I spoke, each word firm. "You're going to face yourself. Go to therapy not because you're sick, but because you've never learned your own feelings. Learn money management and responsibility, and finish every hour of community service the court assigned. And beyond that, I looked at the flower bed the winter storms had ruined. You'll replant this bed. With your hands, with sweat, no hiring help. Because atonement starts with your hands." Alan was silent, then whispered, "I'll do it." I looked at him, not believing right away, but not shutting him out. I added, slower and softer, "Don't expect me to hold you like before. I'm still your mom, but I'm not the person who fixes your mistakes anymore. This time you'll carry the consequences yourself." He bowed his head, eyes shining. "I understand. I just want a chance to make it right." A week later, Alan started coming every Saturday morning. He didn't knock much or talk. He just nodded hello and went to the yard. He dug, mounded soil, watered. Each afternoon I checked his work. No praise, no criticism. Week after week, the bed came back to life, new shoots pushing up between old, dry roots. One day he placed a small sign, "For Mom, because nothing blooms again unless we care for it." I read it and quietly walked away. Something inside me loosened and tightened at the same time. Then one afternoon while I was making tea, my email pinged. It was from Helen. I opened it and read the subject line, "Request to do community service at the senior center." In the message, she wrote, "Mrs. Jeanette, I know you owe me nothing, but I want to make amends by doing something useful. I've applied to transfer my community service to the local senior center. I want to help people like you, not to win your forgiveness, but to learn respect." I read it several times and nodded to myself. Some apologies don't need to be spoken to your face, they just need to be carried out. I wrote back a short line, "I agree. Keep your distance far enough for peace, close enough to learn." After sending it, I sat there looking at the screen, feeling like the sea after a storm, still rippling but calmer. That evening, Alan came late, hands dirty from soil. He said, "The flower bed's almost done, Mom. Do you want anything else planted?" I answered, "Sunflowers. They turn toward the sun, not the shadows. I want you to remember, when you look at the yard, you can choose where to face." He stood still, then nodded. "Thank you, Mom, for still giving me a place to come back to." I didn't say, "You're forgiven." I just smiled and handed him a glass of water. The silence between us was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. That night, after he left, I opened the small notebook I'd set aside. On a fresh page, I wrote in blue ink, "Boundaries between mother and son. 1. No borrowing. Love isn't a bank. If you want to help, help. Don't borrow under the name of family. 2. No lies. Tell the truth, even when it hurts. Most wounds can heal, except those from lies. 3. No insults. We can argue, but we will not degrade each other. Words are actions, and sometimes leave deeper scars than actions." I closed the notebook and set it beside my steaming tea. Offshore, the waves rolled in steady, and moonlight shimmered across the water. I leaned back, let the salt air touch my skin, and watched the new flowers bend in the breeze. A light gust brought the smell of damp earth and fresh blooms. I felt my heart smooth out. Not full forgiveness, not forgetting, but peace when looking back. Because reconciliation doesn't come from hugs, apologies, or tears. It comes from slow, honest, patient steps by people who once hurt each other. And in the night sea's breathing, I knew. Maybe tomorrow, when the sunflowers open, I'll smile not because the wound is gone, but because it's become good soil for something new to grow. A year passed since the day I walked into that house with the eviction order in my hand. Now the home had its true shape again, or better, its own shape. Calm, bright, filled with lavender from the new beds. Every morning, I opened the window to let in the sea wind and the gentle sound of waves. On the table, my mother's porcelain tea set was polished, its old cracks mended with gold seams in the kintsugi style. I learned online because I believe cracks can be beautiful if you're brave enough to look straight at them. That day, Hannah and Micah came by. They ran into the yard and shouted when they saw the sunflowers blazing along the fence. I watched with my hand over my heart, feeling a soft, steady beat. Sitting under the trellis, Hannah suddenly asked, "Grandma, why do adults hurt each other?" The question stilled me. She was only 13, but her eyes saw the world with a depth beyond her years. I sat beside her and answered quietly, "Because adults sometimes forget that fairness is a kind of love, too. When you love without boundaries, you end up hurting yourself and others. Fairness keeps love standing. It keeps it from being twisted by fear or selfishness." Hannah looked up, thought for a moment, then smiled. "Like you and Dad, right?" I nodded gently. "Yes, sweetheart." It took many years, but in the end, everyone has to learn that. That June, I officially started the Jeanette Foundation, a small fund to help seniors facing asset abuse or financial manipulation. I didn't want my story to be just a lawsuit. It needed to be a door for people who think they have no voice. On opening day, I wore a pale lavender dress with a sprig of lavender at my collar. Carver came and shook my hand firmly. He said, "You," turned pain into strength. "Not everyone can do that," I smiled lightly. "I just don't want others to learn this lesson the way I did." On the mission board, I wrote the first line. "Self-respect is the greatest asset no one has the right to take." That fall, Alan finished his 200 hours of community service. On a Friday afternoon, he sent a short email. "Mom, I'm done at the nursing home. I'd like to take you to dinner. Not to explain, just to sit with you. Like before." I read it and sat quiet for a long time. Then I replied, "Okay, but you don't need to stay overnight. Everything needs to start again from a safe distance." We met at a small seaside place. Alan arrived early and chose a table facing the waves. When I walked in, he stood, said nothing, and placed a hand over his chest as a greeting. The meal was quiet, no tears, no apologies, no promises. Just two people sharing a silence that no longer hurt. Before I left, Alan said, "I'm replanting flowers in our backyard." "Like you taught me," I answered. "Flowers only bloom when the gardener means it, Alan. Take care of them, not for me, for yourself." A few weeks later, I saw Helen again. No fancy car, no designer clothes, no bright lipstick. She stood outside the homeless center, holding a tray of meals and handing one to an elderly woman shivering in the cold. When she turned, she saw me. Her eyes flickered, then she bowed slightly and said softly, "Hello, Mrs. Monroe." I smiled back. No resentment, no distance, just two women who had weathered a storm, each carrying a few scars. I thought, forgiveness is a journey, not a decision. And sometimes the first step is simply a calm nod. At the end of the year, I signed my will again. Next to the Jeanette Foundation, I wrote clearly, "The house in Cape May will belong to the foundation and to Hannah and Micah, but only if they keep three things: respect, honesty, no borrowing through deceit." When I signed, I exhaled, not from age, from peace. I had put my life back in order, page by page, line by line, like restoring an old piece of music until it played in tune again. That night, the sea breeze was gentle. I stepped onto the porch with a cup of lavender tea. The moon hung full over the water, reflected in small ripples. The house stood firm after all the storms, still there, still smelling of wood, flowers, and calm. I opened my journal and wrote the final line of the story. I fell, but I stood up, and I'm standing strong. I closed the book and set it on the table, letting the wind pass over it like my own quiet goodbye. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of this story. If you're sitting somewhere, maybe with a morning cup of tea, in a cozy room, or listening to waves far away, I want to say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for listening. My story isn't just about loss and justice. It's about believing that even when our hearts crack, we can rebuild ourselves through kindness. If you found a bit of connection, courage, or calm in these words, then this journey mattered. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Leave a note, a hello, or a small piece of your own story. I read every comment truly with gratitude and respect, because each line you share is proof we're not alone in finding our way back to self-respect and fairness. If you believe kindness, justice, and dignity are still worth keeping, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can share more true stories and more journeys of standing back up. I'll be here quietly, sincerely waiting to hear your part of the story.